The Chaos Dwarfs. Lots of armor, lots of fire damage, tons of destructive power, missiles and artillery in our hands. In this video I will show you every single unit in the roster, and I will also showcase how each unit will become after research, XP and redline skills. I'll also go over the lords and heroes of course, so let's get started. So, for this video and for any army rosters that I'll be conducting, I'll be showcasing units before any upgrades and after any upgrades. I'm talking about redline skills, research skills, and experience. Also some special ones in some cases, which I'll go through when it's applicable. Basically, this means that you can see both the initial stats and then the later stats in the campaign, so that you can see how they progress, what will they be increased upon, are they getting any weapon strength? In the case of Goblin Laborers, no. Are they getting any charge bonus? No. Are they getting fire resistances? No. But they're getting ward save, they're getting more melee attack, more melee defense. That's the sort of idea that I wanted to bring up to you. I hope you guys like it. It was a lot of work to compile all of this. So, let's get into it. So we begin with Ostrogoth Ironhand. He's a spellcaster with a mixed lore of Hashut and lore of fire, very damage dealing centered, so he can be quite the menace on the battlefield. In addition, he's also a melee expert with tons of armor, good leadership, really nice speed. He's quite fast, almost cavalry speed. He has 60 melee attack with magical attacks and flaming attacks, which is always nice, a good amount of melee defense, and weapon strength, which is mostly armor piercing, so he can go to toe against any armor targets really well. In addition, he has quite a hefty account of hit points, which is particularly useful for a caster, honestly, so he can be quite the menace even on a 1v1 situation. And he's also a small entity, which means that in essence he won't suffer from any bonuses versus large enemies that he fights, which is always nice, especially when you have a caster lord that you want to stay safe. It's always good that they are not affected by any bonuses versus large. As for his abilities in campaign, he does have Mechanical Overdrive, a passive ability that increases his base weapon damage up to 15% and melee attack up to 8%, with the intensity increasing with each kill made by the unit. So he gets in combat and gets better as he gets some kills. With the items, he'll also obtain some good abilities, such as the passive ability Stone Mantle, giving him physical resistance of up to 30% and less speed, up to minus 10%, with the effect intensity increases as the unit takes damage. So basically, he'll become more tanky and less speedy as he's taking damage, good to ensure that he stays alive for a longer time, which makes him an excellent duelist, honestly. Finally, he does have the ability Black Hammer of Hashut. It gives him more damage and armor piercing damage for 32 seconds, and also imbues with Flammable, giving enemies a weakness to fire damage, which you can then exploit with anyone else. We now have Drazwath the Ashen, a spellcaster with the lore of Hashut, very damage dealing and hex based lore really, so you will benefit your army by making sure that their stats are lowered, or just by wiping out some of the enemy units here. He's also a decent melee combatant, not as good as Ostrogoth, but still he does have a ton of armor, he does have lots of melee attack, well, definitely not as much as Ostrogoth, but still lots for any lord or caster really. Tons of melee defense, so he survives really well, but the weapon strength, it's not armor piercing. It does have a hefty bonuses versus infantry, so he may yet be able to clear on his own some weaker infantry units, of course some chaff infantry, some missile units if he can get there. It's pretty cool for that. His hit points are not as great as Ostrogoth, so make sure that you don't confuse both. He will make sure to deal with some weaker characters, maybe some enemy casters for instance, but be careful with those heavy hitters from the enemy, of course. In terms of abilities, he does have Dark Renown, increasing the melee attack by +8 for all allies in 35 meters around him if they have the Contempt abilities, so it's particularly good for, of course, your Chaos Dwarf infantry. In addition, he can also get the Graven Scepter, giving him the ability of imbuing himself with magical attacks, base weapon damage and armor-piercing damage and melee attack, all cool, so that he can become actually quite a frontline and a damage dealer lord. Now, we do have the passive ability Demon Spite Crucible, which is more focused into the magic, of course, increasing his spell mastery up to 20%, which increases with each kill made by him. So it's always a good idea to put him in front, getting a few kills, and then if he becomes a little bit weaker, go back. You already have the spell mastery increased, so your spells will just do a lot more damage. And then the passive ability from the Hellshard Amulet, which gives melee damage reflection +20 and a ward save of +10% when in melee, basically just turning him even further into a frontline caster, basically. So be aware of how much he changes during the campaign with these nice hefty abilities and items. Now we have Zayton the Black. He's a melee expert, tons of armor and actually a silver shield to block incoming missile fire. Lots of melee attack and melee defense as well, so he can survive pretty well against any other targets, any lords, any heroes really. His handicap is that his weapon strength is not focused in armor piercing, so most likely you should be going against anyone without too much armor, or you should support him with someone else, maybe another hero or maybe a caster, to improve his chances basically. Still quite the nice frontline lord for you. In terms of abilities, he does have Sadistic Snare, melee defense debuff, and the enemy cannot move for 33 seconds, which is great. It basically only affects one enemy in range, but it's excellent to ensure that that enemy gets focused down, for example. A great tactical advantage for you to use with Zayton the Black. He can also get regeneration right here, which is always excellent for any lord, so yeah, Zayton will become quite the resilient lord after that. And if that wasn't enough for you, with the quests, with the items that you can get, you can give a quite hefty ability of getting up to 30% ward save, which is excellent. It increases as the unit takes damage, so the more damage that he takes, the more he becomes better at deflecting it. In addition, an item that deserves a lot of attention. It completely corrects the weapon damage of Zayton, so he gets more weapon strength, more armor-piercing weapon damage, and the sundering attacks, diminishing the armor as if it wasn't enough. And you also get up to 40 melee attack and up to 50% armor-piercing weapon damage with each kill. So the more he kills, the more he becomes an armor-piercing menace, which is really cool. And finally, you do have the Chaos Rune Shield, an active ability, basically the passive ability, sorry, that it creates the unique situation of being immune to contact effects, such as poison, for instance, and this affects allies in range. So really cool if you're fighting Nurgle, for instance, with all those poison attacks. So it's really cool, really effective, actually, for him to even become more of a frontline character. Your basic melee lord is the Overseer. Tons of armor with a silver shield, so he's quite resilient. He also has quite a lot of melee attack and melee defense. Weapon strength, it's not majorly armor piercing, but he can still do some damage, especially against any enemy lords without too much armor, or enemy casters, for instance, or even single entities. Just be aware of that armor piercing deficiency of the Overseer. Still quite a good choice for your secondary armies. In campaign, your Overseer has 3 possibilities in terms of specific skills that he can get. The Sorcerer's Thrall, increasing casual replenishment rate and spell resistance for your army, and as well giving him some hefty hit points and the wound recovery time reduced there. Or you can go into the Adjutant, which gives him less upkeep and recruitment costs for his army, and also later more armor for your Chaos Dwarf infantry and more ammunition, which is always excellent if you plan to use those units with him. He can also get the Brutal Disciplinarian, more campaign movement range, more income from battle loot, and more labor gained from post-battle. And later on you can also get less upkeep for all the hobgoblins in the chaff units basically, and more leadership for them. So quite a different style depending on which one you select. If you select this one, of course the other ones are locked, so be wary of that. But yeah, quite a decent secondary lord here. Your final choice as a lord is the Sorcerer Prophet. You have 4 possibilities: Death, Hashut, Fire, and Metal. So basically a spellcaster, of course, with the respective lore. Not someone that you'll put in the front line, of course, because of those stats. He still has quite a lot of armor and decent melee attack and melee defense, but lacks a little bit in the weapon strength without too much armor piercing. Still, he still has a great advantage on the battlefield compared to others, because he has a ranged attack, not a lot of range, but still quite effective, and the missile strength is still quite good. But the best part is this: he does have flammable with these missile attacks. So basically all the enemies attacked by him will get a weakness to fire damage, which means that if you're about to engage them with any fire attacks unit, be sure to make sure that you get at least one shot off with this Sorcerer Prophet, so that they get just that little bit more damage from your attacks with the other unit. Quite a nice combo to use with these Sorcerer Prophets, of course. Your Sorcerer Prophets can also get one of 3 skill choices. Basically, Thirst for Magic, if you plan to use it mostly for the magic, so Winds of Magic Power Reserve, Magic Item Drop Chance, and Cooldown Reduced to all spells. Always nice. Or you can go into Flesh Sacrifice. He can get Perfect Vigor and Unbreakable, which is always excellent. And the third choice is the Voice of Hashut. He can get more casualty replenishment rate for the Lord's army, for your army, more vigor loss reduction or less vigor loss reduction for your army, and also +3 recruit rank for centaurs and monsters. If you plan to recruit those with this sorcerer, well, by all means use this one. So yeah, quite some hefty choices there for your Sorcerer Prophet lords. The first hero that you can get is the Demon Smith Sorcerer, available in Death, Fire, Hashut, and Metal lores. It's a spellcaster with a missile attack that also causes the flammable effect, so it can be great to ensure your spells and units give more damage to any particular enemy. Tons of armor, but really nothing else. Low melee attack, low melee defense, not a lot of weapon strength, so he's better off, if anything, fighting low quality infantry or even another spellcaster, but for the most part ensure that he's safe. He shouldn't be really getting into melee too much, but yeah, you still have that high armor, so maybe he has some versatility here compared to other spellcasters. So your Demon Smith Sorcerers, they do have specific abilities. Let me show you. They can get these at rank 10. So the Infernal Engineer gives himself missile resistance and an ally a reload skill +20. So if it affects allies in range, basically it's good to have any grounded friendly war machines or artillery in range, so that can benefit from that reload skill. He can also give Reforge. Now, Reforge is really cool because it is a regeneration, it's a heal. He can restore the hit points of any unit with the Hellforge attribute. This is mostly some monsters and the artillery units, which is great. You can actually make them really powerful with the heal ability here. Only 2 uses, but still quite powerful. And of course he can get the all-terrain vehicle, giving Vanguard deployment for war machines and Strider for war machines. This is always excellent to ensure that those artillery units and even the chariot-based units, the war machines, are always good to use in different circumstances, of course. He can also get either the Sorcerer's Curse, which gives him more physical resistance at the cost of some miscast-based chance, or he can get Careful Casting, which is less cooldown and less Winds of Magic cost for any of his lore spells. So it's really cool. These abilities, make sure that you use them for the best in your campaigns. Second hero choice will be the Infernal Castellan, a ranged character, a missile specialist basically. He does have decent melee stats actually, with the armor, with some nice melee attack and melee defense, some armor piercing weapon strength, but don't count on that bonus as large, it's really negligible honestly. In terms of his main effect, of course, it's to stay out of in range, stay out of melee for the most part, and just use that nice missile strength over there with a ton of armor piercing. So he's great at sniping those characters, lords, single entities, maybe even some large monstrous units, something like that. So yeah, that's his main idea as well. So for the Infernal Castellan, you do have the ability Dig In. Basically, it takes him 25 seconds to dig in, then he becomes entrenched, giving more range, more missile resistance, and expert charge defense. So, but he cannot move. This is a really nice one. So, if you find a good location for him to stand on, basically just keep them there. He'll gain more range. He'll gain more missile resistance. He can also give some abilities to your army, such as the Inspiring Inferno, giving him immune to psychology for any infernal units there. And he can also cause fear or gain immunity to psychology himself. In addition, he gets extra powder, this passive ability, which increases allies' armor piercing explosive damage and basic explosive damage. So he's great to have close to your artillery units, for instance. He'll get more range, so he can at least hit someone from there. And also your artillery will get a little bit more damage there. In addition, he can also restock, so this ability will allow him to increase the ammunition or replenish the ammunition of any ally, which is great. He has 4 uses of those, so that is always good to have. Then in addition, he does have a lot of specific enhances for himself here, but you have to choose. Either you can give him less range, more explosive bullets, for instance, or you can go into having him with magical attacks and more range. It's up to you, and then of course all the other specifics of this choice that you can have. If you are looking for a very strong melee fighter hero, we have the Bull Center Tarruk. Melee specialist, armor piercing melee with a hefty anti-large, so he's great at defeating those large targets, those lords in mounts, those heroes in mounts, those even single entities. So he's really great, especially as the front line or to protect your lord. So yeah, quite decent stats, quite a lot of weapon strength, not too much armor compared to other Chaos Dwarf heroes or lords, of course. Decent melee attack and slightly lower melee defense, so keep an eye on him. He's best actually used up with the charge bonus, so charge him in, cycle charge him if you can, and that way you'll get the most of it. He also has scaly skin, so a nice missile resistance to ensure that he doesn't get too much damage from being focused on, but be wary of that, of course. He's a large target, so anyone can actually focus him down pretty easily, so just keep an eye on those enemy missiles for sure. So in terms of specific skill choices for the Bull Center, you do have quite a lot of them. So you have Bulgor with more armor piercing weapon damage and charge bonus, Frenzy that you can give him the ability, of course, more weapon damage, similar to others, of course you've seen these ones, so yep, definitely focused on damage dealing part. You can give him the attribute of causing terror, of course, Living Metal Flesh, more battle healing cap, and ward safe, which is always excellent, and then a three possibility skill here. So you can get Temple Guardian, so basically a passive ability for him to gift any ally unit, lord or hero actually, physical resistance plus 15%, which is always great. This is perfect if you're counting on him protecting some other lord, for instance, which is always nice. And then he will get even the Stalwart Defender, so he gets more armor and more melee defense. or you can make him into an effective agent. If you're planning to do this, basically to use him as an agent, you can always get this, and even trusted agent there with level 3, so quite nice, quite nifty if you want to use him as an agent in the campaign map. Or you can go into more murderous charge here with the ability, so he'll become a menace when charging, basically, as you can see here. More mass, more charge bonus, charge speed and acceleration. So in essence, it's really good to ensure that you cycle charge him a lot. If you use him like that, probably you will want this one. And of course then you can still get even more weapon strength and more melee attack, so it's always up to you as you prefer. And finally, in terms of heroes, we also have the legendary hero Gordu's Backstabber. Quite a unique hero, actually. He's a great assassin style character. Not a lot of armor, but he does have a bronze shield, so he can survive a little bit those missile attacks and being focused fired upon. Hefty melee attack and a lot of melee defense, so he'll survive mostly compared to other heroes and lords, actually, especially in melee there. His weapon strength is not mostly armor piercing, so it's just standard, but yeah, you can still use him quite hefty against any enemy targets, as you'll see next with the abilities, of course. So most of the time you want to use him as an ambush hero, trying to get an enemy lord or hero or even single entity to get the most out of him and ensure that he gets to use those those hefty dice that he have there. I'm going to show you that ability in just a few moments. So Gordu's special abilities, it includes the Crooked Dice, which is basically a rolled dice. Honestly, it grants one of the listed effects at random, so he can either get more armor, more physical resistance, or more damage resistance. This is great. It adds that RPG element. Of anyone who played Dungeons and Dragons will know about this, of course, so it's really cool. So yeah, it's really a nice effect, and I would really love it. Then he also has the Dagger of Malice, which imbues his attack with poison and gives him base weapon damage plus 100% and melee attack. So as you can see here, he's getting into that specific assassin style hero, so it's really cool. He's really great to go against any single entity, especially hitting them by surprise. He's also a lucky git. So he has a passive ability, regeneration ability, where he can get quite a hefty heal per second if he's lower than 25% on his hit points, of course. Then you also get the abilities over here. So for all units in the armies, he can increase the ammunition and missile strength for hobgoblin units, of course. He can also give him melee defense and missile resistance, so you can use him quite well with a hobgoblin based army, which is excellent. He gives them all sort of buffs, as you can see there. So if you're planning to do one, by all means just give them this. He'll also get the frenzy ability, which further goes into giving him, you know, this sort of damage dealing, fast damage dealing over there. He can also get the ability Get the Gits, which summons the Hobgoblin Cutthroats. 3 uses of that, so a summon ability to add that. He's just so overpowered. So cool. He can also get They Need Stabbing. They need stabbing! So it lowers the enemy lord or hero melee defense and armor. So furthermore, focusing on that specific idea of him becoming an assassin. And of course, some other skill choices that you have here, mostly regarding enemy heroes, so he diminishes them greatly. Then he also gets some ward save for him, and he can also get Vanguard deployment and stalk for hobgoblins. So if you plan to use him on an army, definitely try a hobgoblin army, especially in the early game. He's really good for it. So in terms of specific army abilities, we do have the Malign Authority. This is a passive ability of +8, range 55 meters, so any friendly units with Contempt are in range will help these Goblin Laborers to get a little bit more leadership. And what is the Contempt ability, or where is it? In the Chaos Dwarf units. So basically the Contempt ability also has another effect. Witnessing other friendly units rout will only affect this unit's leadership if they also have the Contempt attribute. In essence, they really don't care about the laborers. If these guys start to rout, the Chaos Dwarf warriors don't care. It's nothing for them. They just care about their brethren, really, so who cares about the goblin laborers there, you know? So basically that's how that ability, the contempt, works. Now we do have a third one basically, which is the Hell Forged. As it says on the tooltip, this unit can be restored in battle by the Demon Smith's Reforge ability, which is great. It basically gives these guys the possibility of being regenerated in battle. Similar to the same stuff with the war machines such as this magma cannon, or the artillery units such as this magma cannon, as you can see. So those are the army or specific abilities for the Chaos Dwarfs. So starting off the infantry with the Goblin Laborers. These are expendable meat shield, weak against armor, poor leadership as you can read there. But as you can see, very low leadership, no armor whatsoever. Melee attack and melee defense, nearly nothing honestly. And weapon strength just 16 and 4 armor piercing. They will do best to die, but of course use them specifically to ensure that the enemy wastes a charge, to ensure that the enemy wastes some time trying to go through these Goblin Laborers. Use them against any missiles, try to put them ahead of any units that you consider valuable. That's their purpose, to die so that others survive and others can do the damage, of course. In terms of later on what you get from them is that, well, they do become better at their job. They do become really better, really nice at their job. They get a lot of leadership. They get some nice speed, so they at least are a little bit fast for an infantry unit. Some more melee defense and more melee attack. They become like a tier 1 proper infantry unit, especially with a ward save. It's amazing that they get ward save as well. But yeah, I wouldn't count on them when defeating any chosen, of course. So just use them as a cheap expendable infantry, as they say. Next we have the Orc Laborers. The advantage over the Goblin Laborers actually is that they are armor piercing, so they still can do some damage at least. They have a little bit better melee attacks, so at least there's some use for these Orc Laborers. Still, lack of armor will imply that they are just expendable, just as a meat shield, but at least they can do some little bit of damage, especially in the early stages. Now, if you can upgrade them, you know, basically they will become a little bit better at that, almost to the point that they become a tier 1 infantry, say, especially with that armor piercing. So there's still some uses for this unit. Next in line we have a proper infantry, let's say the Hobgoblin Cutthroats. These are your proper tier 1 infantry, say. They don't have a lot of armor, but they do have a bronze shield, so they're better at holding the line and ensuring that they don't get too much damage from missiles. Still decent leadership, especially when nearby a contempt unit, so that is good. Somewhat decent melee attack and melee defense, and then a weapon strength that has decent stats, base weapon damage and armor piercing damage. Now this is being enhanced because their hit points are greater than 50%, because they have the Backstabber's ability. So they'll do a little bit more damage while they're still fresh. So of course, if they haven't taken any damage, they'll just become worse over time as they take some damage, of course. Now, if you actually manage to get them quite buffed up, they'll become slightly better, to the point that they can, you know, hold a line pretty well. 45, 46 melee attack and melee defense. Now that's tier 2 close by. They still get some ward save as well, as you can see there, more leadership. So they'll become much better at what they do, to the point that they become like a tier 2 or 1.5 units, say. So definitely you can do some Hobgoblin only armies, and these guys can at least hold the line a little bit. Hobgoblin Sneaky Gits. These are quite a sneaky infantry. Not a lot in terms of stats, just decent melee attack, which does apply poison, which is great. You do have some bonuses versus infantry, so that's their main target right there. They have a precursor missile weapon, so basically they'll fire the the ammunition that they have before getting into the battle, really, which is always nice. These are great units to ambush, and they have all the necessary stats for it. They have Vanguard deployment, they have Firewast moving, and they have Stalk. So definitely you'll have no trouble getting these guys where you want them. Particularly nice to use against any lower quality infantry, but they can do some damage against anyone else, especially smaller targets, of course, because of the bonuses versus infantry. In the latest stages of the game, they just become quite decent. As you can see, their missile strength even improves, their speed improves, melee attack, melee defense, leadership, all the stats that you really want for them. Remember that they do have that ward save, so in essence you can still use these units, a couple of them, just for that nice debuff of the poison. Now for some proper infantry, Chaos Dwarf Warriors. They're heavily armored with a silver shield, so blocking all those missiles, and also hefty amount of leadership, not the best melee attack, so they'll need some upgrades there, and a hefty amount of melee defense, so they're very good holding infantry. That's the sort of idea here. They also have a charge defense versus large, so keep them steady if they want to negate the charge bonus of any large attacker. Not a lot of weapon strength, not a lot of armor-piercing weapon damage, so yeah, all points out for them being good at staying in place, ensuring that others do the work. Now, however, if we check out their stats later on, you can see that it kind of changes. Their melee attack increases a lot, their melee defense is quite hefty, so basically with the fire resistance, with the spell resistance, they do become quite a solid front line. They will be able to do some damage at least, so definitely there are some uses for these units, especially still into the late game. Trust me, they will hold on against heavier targets for sure. Just the lack of armor piercing, always count on that, because they will definitely struggle against anything that has a lot of armor. Otherwise, they'll do just fine. So, on to a regiment of renown, the Blazing Beards of Bassarak. I don't know if I mispronounce it, but that's how it goes. So basically just an upgraded version of the Chaos Dwarf Warriors. Still quite a nice upgrade. The special notion of these guys is that they do have a ranged weapon. Only 2 in ammunition, so this is more like a precursor weapon. They'll fire some missiles which are armor piercing, which is excellent, before engaging. So the weakness of the Chaos Dwarf Warriors is reduced with these guys because they do have at least some form of armor piercing. They do also have the Frenzy ability, which means that they will, instead of the Chaos Dwarf Warriors, do a little bit more damage. They're very good, especially with that flaming attack, very good at making some damage, especially against anyone that is suffering from the flammable effects, for instance. So yeah, more of a frontline mix with damage dealer infantry, certainly good for your early to mid stages, even late game stages. They can do some work, especially with that armor piercing ammunition. So yeah, don't sleep on these guys. Up for some Chaos Dwarf Warriors with great weapons. Contrary to the former Chaos Dwarfs, they are armor piercing, which implies that you'll be a good damage dealer, especially against armored opponents. They have a lot of armor leadership, lacking in the speed, still not a lot of melee attack, and they lose a little bit of melee defense, but they will still be able to do some damage, particularly to any armored units. Now, in the later stages of the game, they do increase the best stats. Their armor, their leadership, their melee attack, their melee defense, they are increased. So basically, these units will still pack a punch in the late game as well. You can definitely take advantage of the fact that you have the unit caps limits on the Chaos Dwarfs, so that you can still use these units later on, definitely with some army combinations. So yeah, just rest at ease that they will always progressively be better at precisely what they do, hitting armored targets well. Now to some proper infantry, the Infernal Guard. Armored and shielded, lots of armor, a silver shield, leadership, a great melee defense. All of these stats make them quite a holding infantry, and hold they will, definitely. Not a lot of weapon strength, but still a hefty amount of armor piercing. No 11, still not that bad. And definitely that charge defense versus large, so they're good at holding everything. Basically the front, the flanks, it's fine for them. Now, in terms of the late game, they do just become quite better at what they do, especially with more armor, with more melee attack and more melee defense. Suddenly, they'll become quite good at actually causing damage if it were not for that lack of armor piercing damage. But of course, anyone with like 50 to 60 armor or less, they'll still do some damage, especially if they will hold on, they will take their time doing damage, but they won't lose too much damage because with so much melee defense, 77, that's really great, and especially with that armor. So yeah, these guys definitely a frontline forever. As soon as you start getting these guys, you can ensure that they will hold on to your armies really well. Now for some Infernal Guard with great weapons. Similar to the Infernal Guard, lots of armor, lots of melee defense still. Still decent melee attack, not too shabby, but the difference is, of course, they are armor piercing. So join them with the other Infernal Guards and you have quite the front line. They'll be able to wreck through anything and they'll still be able to survive anything because, of course, it's how much armor and melee defense they have. In the later stages of the game, they just really become good at what they do. Definitely with the improvements to their melee attack and their melee defense, they'll just be able to survive longer and do more damage faster. So yeah, definitely they will always be useful in any army. One of my favorite units probably to use on the front line. And finally, the best of the best, the Infernal Ironsworn. A magical axe infantry. Basically, they have tons of armor, a silver shield, so nothing is going to get through them. The melee attack is still decent, 42, it's not a bad amount. It's still magical attacks, so they're great at hunting down those demons as well. They'll survive at least, they won't cause them too much damage. But of course, with the melee defense so high and that armor, you can bet that they are going to survive really well. They still have a nice ranged attack, which is armor piercing. So before anyone hunts them down or tries to hit them, they'll of course use that missile and wreck them. So definitely a great unit to have in any front line, anywhere. They'll just hold on forever and they'll still cause some damage. Later stages of the game, they just become a menace. I mean, look at that, 86 melee defense, 63 melee attack, 137 armor. Yeah, they're not going anywhere. That's precisely, if you wanted a top tier infantry in your front lines, well, you've got it. And if you still want someone to take out any infantry in the game, then we have the Immortals, the Infernal Ironsworn ROR. So basically all of these stats, they scream one thing: let's clean up some infantry, shall we? Armor 125, lots of leadership, not a lot of speed, so make sure that you hit anyone that is slow. Melee attack 46, melee defense 50, so they have no difficulty surviving and dealing damage, which is also flaming damage and magical attacks, so go against anyone, really. Their weapon strength is not armor piercing. It does have quite a decent amount, you know, it should be mentioned, and also with the bonuses versus infantry, so they'll clear up enemies really well. In addition, they also have the Undying Will passive ability, which means that they do get vigor per second minus 1%, so they suffer less from vigor issues, which is great. And entities cannot die while the ability is active, so if their hit points are greater than 75%, they will still be at full force. Only afterwards they'll start to lose anyone. But yeah, definitely a great unit to have in any army. Of course, you can only bring one of them, but wherever you put them, they'll do the work, trust me. So speaking of some missile units, let's start with Hobgoblin Archers. Not a lot of armor, not a lot of leadership, not a lot of everything, really. They do have flammable ammunition and a decent range, not too much, but still they will be able to do some damage, especially early to mid game. Their missile strength, you can see that is buffed a little bit. That is because of the Backstabber's abilities, so plus 30% of the base missile damage and weapon damage if their hit points are greater than 50%. So yeah, they will definitely do their job well, especially in the early game. Now, One note in terms of the upgrades, as I would like to mention. For missile units, you'll notice that the missile strength says minus reload time. That's because the reload time, when you increase in XP, all that they get is lesser reload time. The damage per volley still is the same, which I wanted to illustrate better. So that's why in the calculations I do the 15 plus 12% plus 12%, of course, but I don't include the plus 3. I just put the number there just for you guys to watch. No, my math is not bad. It's just to better illustrate how much damage per volley you're actually sending. I thought that would be a good idea. If not, sorry about that. The math is all done right now. But still, they do become quite a good missile unit later on. Definitely a decent amount of damage. Not a lot of armor piercing, but of course, because it is flammable and because it is flaming or fire damage, and you have the flammable effects from some characters and some spells, for instance, definitely they can have some work to do in the early to mid stages even of the game. Now to one of the favorites of many people playing the game, the Chaos Dwarf blunderbusses. Even though they do have a close range, they are a menace to anyone and any target. Tons of armor piercing weapon missile damage, and they do have a silver shield, so they can survive against any enemy ranged attacks on them, especially with all that armor. They're still a decent melee combatant, so they'll survive a little bit, they'll cause damage. Definitely one of the best units in the roster for sure. Just make sure that they are safely protected while they get into range, and then you can wreck anything that they find. So in the later stages of the game, even further that missile strength increases, especially with all that reload time. They'll just hit faster and better, honestly. They don't increase a lot in terms of their melee and their melee stats or their armor or anything like that, only focused on the missile. So yeah, definitely a great unit to use at any point in time. Now to one of the coolest looking units in the game, the Granite Guard, the Regiment of Renowned Chaos Dwarf blunderbusses. These are more of a hybrid missile infantry. They gain a lot of armor and they lose the shield in exchange for getting, of course, an armor-piercing melee attack. So they're basically Chaos Dwarf warriors with great weapons with the beast of a missile attack that is also suppressed, causing the enemy to have less speed. They also have the dig-in ability, which means that if they are not moving for 25 seconds, basically they will get the entrenched ability, more range, more missile resistance, and an expert charge defense. So in essence, one particular unit that you can put in the middle of your front line and they'll still do a lot of damage to anyone that finds them. A decent addition to any army for sure. And finally we have the Infernal Guard with Fire Glaives. Again, in hybrid missile infantry, they have tons of armor, good leadership, flammable melee attacks, as well as armor piercing and anti-large. Now note that the anti-large bonus is just 5, it's not really that much, but still against weaker cavalry units, because they have that charge defense versus large, definitely just leave them on the flanks, they'll do well. Especially because they'll fire first, they'll have the range for it. 145, it's much better than, of course, the blunderbusses, still with flaming ammunition and a hefty missile strength with lots and tons of armor piercing. Now in the later stages of the game they definitely become a menace, especially because of course everything that is good increases. The armor, the missile strength, the reload time, they even get a missile resistance, so they'll become much better at surviving those. Of course, with the leadership and melee attack and melee defense from experience, they definitely become good to holding the flanks. That's how I would use them, but they can just be stationary on the back line, and you don't need to worry too much if they get attacked, because of course they can deal with whatever comes up until then their front. Just make sure that you keep an eye on them, maybe one unit or another protecting them nearby, or maybe just a hero to protect them or something like that, and you'll have no worries with the back line. Let's start the cavalry discussion with the Hobgoblin Wolf Raiders with spears. Very fast, vanguard deployment. And they're very weak against armor, but they do have a bronze shield. Not a lot in terms of stats, melee attack, melee defense quite low, weapon strength, not a lot of armor piercing, but still, they do get the Cowardly Despoilers. Base weapon damage plus 25% when attacking a rear or flank of a unit. That's exactly how you need to use them. Take advantage of the Vanguard deployment, go after the enemy artillery, enemy missiles, they'll do their work. They do have the hide in the forest, so try to use those as well. Now, in addition to this, later on in the stages, they become quite a tier 2 cavalry, definitely. So we know the speed, the leadership, the melee attack, the melee defense all increase really well. They do get the ward save, still a nice charge bonus increase, so you can definitely use them as a cycle charging cavalry. They'll do their work, especially considering their price. So yeah, you can still use these guys well into the mid game for sure without a trouble. Now for a monstrous cavalry with the Bull Center Renders. They don't have a lot of armor and don't have a lot of speed, so basically these are kind of like monstrous infantry, honestly, but they do have a silver shield, so they'll survive a lot against those missiles. Bring them against anyone that has missiles and they'll do their work, especially with how much weapon strength they have. 3480 armor piercing damage, that's a menace, definitely. They're lacking in melee attack, but they do have a hefty melee defense, so they will survive long enough to do some damage. They still have quite a nice charge bonus, so definitely cycle charge them. Take advantage of the fact that they are shielded against those missile focused armies, and you can definitely wreck their missile line for sure. In addition to this, later on they just become so menacing. Look at that charge bonus increase, that weapon strength increase, everything that is poor from them, the melee attack, melee defense, and even the armor and leadership. You get that. So basically what these units will become is a true menace to anyone on the battlefield, especially with that weapon strength. They'll become almost like single entity damage there. So yeah, use them against anything other than anti-large units basically, and they'll wreck them. If you're looking for someone to clear up the enemy infantry, search no more for the Bull Center Renders will dual access. They lose their shield in exchange for a weapon strength increase of the bonuses as infantry, 18, that's a hefty amount. They also gain a little bit more melee attack, so definitely these guys are much more offensive than the Bull Center Renders with shields. So yeah, use them against enemy infantry, they'll wreck them for sure. Particularly one note, all of these Bull Center units have 25% missile resistance, so at least they are not completely vulnerable in that regard. Now in the later stages of the game they just become so much better. You can use them honestly as a melee cav, and also as a charge cavalry, as you prefer. The charge bonuses increases, the weapon strength increases, all melee attack and melee defense increases, so suddenly they become quite a nice melee, hybrid melee and shock cavalry indeed. You can definitely use these guys for against anything that is infantry, of course. Just be wary of those heavy anti-large enemy units and any missile units, and you'll be fine. And speaking of anti-large department, basically you have your own version, the Bull Center Renders with great weapons. Now these should clear up the flanks of any enemy anti-large units, especially anti-large cavalry. Just send them out against Blood Knights, against any anti-large units, and they'll do just really great. They are basically a good idea to have in any army, just to cover your flanks against any large targets, but they'll do really great against heroes on mounts or lords on mounts, or even single entities, anything large really that should be their target. They don't have a shield, of course, they lose it for the armor piercing and bonuses as large. Note that they still have that hefty missile resistance, and of course in the end, as you now be ready for it, they just become quite a shock cavalry, melee cavalry hybrid. You know, not as much melee defense as other Bull Center Renders, so be careful with that. Still, cycle charge them into the backs of any large targets, or into the front of them. They'll do the damage that you need. Okay. Coming up next, one of the best regiments of renown here, the Hashut Dark Ravagers, Bull Center Renders, regiment of renown. let's get onto them. So, of course, typical stats for the bull set renders. They do have that bonuses versus infantry, so these are based on the dual weapons version. But they also have a missile attack, as if it wasn't enough. And 10 ammunition, it's quite nice. So they'll be able to also fire whilst moving, so these are a missile cavalry, really. Missile strength, which is armor piercing, and it causes shield breakers, so missile block chance. So how you use them, use their missile attack against anyone with shields and then pepper them with your own missiles. They can have so many uses. They are still really good in melee, they're still really good against anything, and they still have quite some heavy abilities. They have the Revel in Fear. The intensity increases by each enemy unit in range, with the leadership wavering and lower. So the more the enemy is getting lower in wavering and in fear, the better these guys will be. So the more it will deliver a shock to any enemy army. You can honestly make a whole army just around these Hashut's Dark Ravages. They still have the Guardian, so they can protect your lords or heroes, which is great. And they still have physical resistance. As if it wasn't enough. Yeah, definitely one unit that you can make an army full around them. Definitely, so try it out. They're going to do just great in any army. In terms of missile cavalry, all that you have is actually a couple of options. The Hobgoblin Wolf Raiders with bows. They do have quite a lot of range, so 130, and they have Vanguard deployment. So you can definitely put these guys in the front, in the Vanguard, just start immediately peppering down the enemy with arrows, and they'll do their job just nicely. They can fire whilst moving, and they also have the Cowardly Despoilers, which is only affecting their base weapon damage. So they can still be similar to the other Hobgoblin Wolf Raiders, a good unit to attack the rears or flanks. When they waste their ammunition maybe, or some ammunition, they can just go in and finish the job. Not a lot of melee attack, not a lot of melee defense, even though that changes slightly in the end. So you'll get a lot of missile strength. Definitely they'll become better at their job. They have some ward save. They'll get better speed and melee attack there, and other stats of course, but I'll focus on those because definitely they become quite a good hybrid unit. So yeah, don't sleep on those guys. Hobgoblin armies can do really well, actually. They can do really well, especially early to mid game. So yeah, count on those. And for a nice Regiment of Renown, actually, I love when they add these types of Regiment of Renown. I'll show you. The Ogla Khan's Wolf Boys, a hybrid missile cavalry. So definitely jumping up on the missile cavalry, still quite a nice range, quite a nice flaming attacks, but they also are causing flammable, one of your many sources of flammable. So combining these guys with some other missile cavalries, whether they're Hobgoblin Wolf Raiders with bows, it's a great idea. And definitely they do have quite a lot of good abilities for it. They still have Vanguard deployment, they still have firewalls moving, and they have the Pelt of Wolfag. Enemy units that are routing or broken within range, they will also have reduced speed, so no one is fleeing from these guys. That's the idea. In addition, they still have the Cowardly Despoilers, so they're just a much better version of a hybrid cavalry, really, to pursue enemies or to charge them in the rear, cause them to reduce their leadership, and suddenly they cannot flee because of the Pelt of Wolfag. So yeah, it's quite a nice unit that you can use in one of your Hobgoblin based armies. Definitely you're gonna have some fun with these guys. For your monsters, let's start off with a single entity, and I know, yes, cows don't fly, but this one does. The Great Taurus, armor-piercing melee, causes terror, basically a menace to anyone on the skies, and also charge him home to anyone and he'll do damage, especially because it's mostly armor-piercing as well. Not a ton of armor, not a lot of leadership, so make sure that you keep him swinging, keep him moving. Melee defense 28, it's really not that much, so cycle charge this baby and he'll do some damage. Now he also has the Blazing Body, which gives him a physical resistance up to 10% and melee damage reflection up to 25 when in melee. So at least he'll survive a little bit longer, but still don't expect him to be, you know, in melee for prolonged periods of time. Just charge him in, take advantage of that terror ability and cause some demoralization and just jump to the next target. That's the basic idea. Later on, however, he does become quite a menace at that, especially because their melee attack increases, the melee defense still doesn't. He does get a lot more charge bonus, a lot more speed and weapon strength, so he'll just do more damage right at the start. Definitely some physical resistance and ward safe there, so he'll just survive a little bit longer, to the point that you can almost use him as a melee fighter, really just stay with him in the middle, but basically you won't need to cater too much to him. He'll do just fine, especially with so much weapon strength. Oh goodness. Now for one of the most interesting flying monsters, the Lamassu. He causes terror. He does have 2 spells with 1 charge each, the Withering for less leadership and armor, and the Enfeebling Foe, so minus melee defense and melee attack. So he can be quite deadly under the right circumstances, just hitting a very strong target and just making sure that he doesn't have any strength left. He does cause magical attacks, so you can use them as such, you know, taking out any ethereals, taking out anyone with physical resistance, or any demons, for instance. That will be his case. He doesn't have armor piercing, just straight up good weapon strength, and still a nice charge bonus, but his stats are more of a melee monster, really. He can get in there, not a lot of armor, but he can get in there and just stay there, cause some debuffs, and stay there for a longer period of time. Now, one specific one is really good. It's the Sorcerer's Miasma. Only effect range of 20 meters, so keep anyone around him. He negates magical weapons within the effect area. Why is this useful? Because you do have a combo with this. You have some units with physical resistance, as I'll show next. So using the Lamassu with those units may imply quite a good combo, so that the physical resistances are not denied, basically, which is quite a good idea if you're facing any demons, for instance, that you need to use these monsters against. Definitely have that in mind. Now, in terms of the overall damage, overall updates that he gets, the upgrades that he gets, he becomes more and more what I've mentioned, a melee flying monster, really. Lots of melee defense, lots of melee attack, lots of weapon strength, still a hefty charge bonus, but some ward save, some physical resistance. All of that added up makes him survive a little bit longer in melee, in prolonged melees. Still, he is still a single entity. He can get surrounded, but under the right circumstances, he can survive enough to cause the damage for the enemy to rout. And always remember that you still have that Withering, Leadership -8, and the Terror, so chances are that whoever he's attacking will rout before causing extreme damage to him. Now we have the Kadai Fireborn, a monster's infantry. They are quite specific, so let me start. Not a lot of armor, tons of leadership, and they are unbreakable under a specific circumstance. We'll get there. Decent speed. Melee attack is not that great, but it is still magical attack and fire damage. Melee defense, decent. We have a hefty amount of weapon strength, which is also bonuses versus infantry and armor piercing. So they're really great at defeating those armor piercing infantries. Just make sure they are not anti-large, of course. They still have a hefty amount of charge bonus, so you can charge them in and cycle charge them if you want. Now, let's start with some specifics. They are a bound fire demon, which implies that they actually work similar to the demons. They won't rout. They have a physical resistance and fire resistance. And in addition, they have some other specific stuff and stats, such as the ability, the Blazing Body. It increases when in melee. With the time spent, they get damage reflection up to 25 and physical resistance up to 10%. And in addition, they are unbreakable as long as their hit points are greater than 50%. Now, they are a great target to combine with the Lamassu. Why? Specifically because of what happens in the late game. They get even further physical resistance. 30%. If you combine that with this, they can get up to 40% with the melee damage reflection. And they are still able to be restored in battles, to be healed with the Hellforge ability. So you're starting to see that combining these guys with the Lamassu, which negates magical attacks, can be a great idea. This is one of the combos that I would love to try. And still, they do a lot more damage. They have a lot of better stats in terms of melee attack and melee defense, so they'll definitely become quite a powerful melee monsters infantry. You charge them into a target, let them be there, send in the Lamassu, and suddenly all that physical resistance is counting. So yeah, definitely a good idea for you to try out, and a definitely really good unit for the roster. As if the Chaos Dwarfs needed anything else. So as if you needed something else that flies and does tons of damage, we have the Bale Taurus, an armor-piercing melee flying beast. 400 armor-piercing weapon damage. That's a lot. I don't have to tell you that. Melee attack is also flammable with 56. A lower melee defense, but not as low as the Great Taurus. So yeah, that improves. Charge bonus 80, so it means that this unit should actually be charging and cycle charging forever until the enemy is dead. Not a lot of armor, not a lot of leadership, which is his weakness. He does have scaly skin, so a hefty missile resistance, and causes terror. Now, in terms of abilities, remember that he also has that blazing body, so gaining physical resistance and melee damage reflection while in melee, which is great. It means that he can survive a little bit better in the melee than you would expect. And as if it wasn't enough, he's also like the dragon. He can issue a flaming breath, good against armor as well, as if it wasn't enough, so a damage-dealing menace for sure. Now, as if it wasn't enough, of course, he also gets a hefty, nice amount of upgrades, including ward save, physical resistance, tons of weapon strength, to the point that he becomes a giant, really. And that charge bonus and speed also increases, so he'll be able to do a lot of damage as a cycle charging monster for sure. And definitely one of the better units in the roster in terms of monsters. I would honestly just take a couple of these guys, jump into anything really, but of course go into the back line, take care of their heroes, take care of their lord even, as they'll do enough damage for it. Keep them supported, just issue some ranged fire damage on whatever he's targeting, and he'll take care of the rest. Now, if you still are not sure about the monsters, let me show you the Cavalry Destroyer, a colossal monster. So, lots of stuff to talk about. Ton of armor, lots of leadership, he's unbreakable too. Tons of melee attack, which is magical and flaming. Tons of weapon strength, which is also armor piercing for the most part. Not a lot of charge bonus, but this guy is really good to jump in and wreck anything. Not a lot of melee defense means that he'll also take damage. Of course, he needed to have some weakness. Come on, he needed that. But as if it wasn't enough, he has the Hell Forged. He can be healed by the Reforge ability. Can you imagine a colossal monster that can be healed? In addition, he does have the Blazing Body, gaining up to 25 melee damage reflection and physical resistance. You've seen this before. He also has the Hellish Frenzy. So he has Frenzy when his hit points are greater than 75%. So keep that heal up to him to ensure that he stays with this ability. Always don't make him go under those 75%, at least for him to do a lot of damage. Now, he's also unbreakable if the hit points are greater than 50%, which is excellent. So, as if it wasn't enough, he does gain quite a lot of upgrades here. Definitely his melee attack increases, his melee defense, at least he gets a little bit from the experience, but nothing that gives him too much. But his weapon strength gets humongous, as you can see there. And the best trait is actually, for me, the physical resistance. He gets 30%. So combine that with the Lamassu. Join him with the Lamassu, and anyone that has magical attacks suddenly is not really doing great. So, of course, he can do well against anyone else without the Lamassu, but it can be a surprise, especially if you're playing multiplayer, for instance. If you can manage to bring both, yeah, that would be a good idea. So, yeah, of course, with some fun, with some friends, of course, you can surprise them. But yeah, the Cavalry Destroyer, definitely a nice addition to the Chaos Dwarfs roster. As if the Chaos Dwarfs needed anything else, they still have great artillery and war machines, so let's talk about them. The Magma Cannon, let's start. They do have, an interesting part is that they always have armor-piercing weapon damage and base weapon damage, and with the bonus versus infantry, all the artillery units have this, with a magical attack, but melee attack 16, melee defense 10, don't expect them to be a chariot, really. This is just a nice addition for them not to be as weak as other artillery units. Now, in terms of the ammunition, he does cause magical attacks and flaming attacks. Quite a lot of range, which is excellent, really. And one thing that should be noted is that the missile strength, not only is it not armor piercing, but it does do a lot of armor piercing damage, but it also causes the burnt, so less leadership. Not only causes a lot of damage, but it also diminishes their leadership as well, so yeah, definitely not a lot of them are going to survive after the shot from this baby. Now, as if this wasn't enough, he does get a perfect vigor, physical resistance, and magical attacks when his hit points are greater than 25%, and we still have the upgrades. What does he get in increase? Well, more range, more missile strength, missile resistance, and ammunition. So definitely don't count this guy out at all, ever. You can use these magma cannons throughout the whole campaign and they'll do damage to anyone. Trust me. Trust everyone that has been talking about the magma cannons. Definitely a great artillery for you to try out. Now to the Iron Demon, a nice war machine. This is basically a chariot style unit. Tons of nice melee attack, tons of armor and leadership, and nice hefty speed. That weapon strength, of course, you've seen it. It's the same for any war machines here. And he still has a nice charge bonus. Added to the ability more power. More power. Acceleration plus 200% mass, 50% more speed. So definitely kick this up, charge anyone and they'll die. He also has a magical ranged missile attack. So basically he does cause suppression, so lesser speed, and the missile attack is also armor piercing. Definitely a great chariot style unit for your armies. Now, as if it wasn't enough, as you've seen me, he does get more ammunition, more range, more missile strength, so all the stats that are improved are basically his missile stats, but still, don't neglect using him as a chariot as well. He can still do a lot of damage as such throughout the entire game. In our Regiment of Renown, the Demon Stung, an Iron Demon Regiment of Renown. So basically the main difference is that it has a different ranged attack, so less range, more missile strength, but it's not mainly armor piercing, as you can see there. Still, shots per volley 24, he becomes a flamethrower really, basically. And it causes burnt, less leadership. So overall, a nice addition to your armies, of course. Use him as like a chariot, you know, charge him in, keep him away from too much combat, and then just use that missile attack to overcome any and all units that you can find. Now for a unit that has been ever since Warhammer 1 was introduced back in the day, oh the times, the Hell Cannon. Armor-piercing missiles with magical ammunition, quite a lot of range, so he'll do a lot of damage from quite afar. He also has the uniqueness of being unbreakable, so for an artillery unit, of course, it gives you some time to save them in case they are under attack. Now, some abilities that he has, the Boom ability. What a nice name for an ability. Boom. It does exactly that. It gives you more explosive damage and armor-piercing explosive damage. Pop this one up when your Hell Cannon is going to attack, so he can do a little bit more damage. And in addition, if he is under attack, you can increase his speed and acceleration and vigor just to ensure that he gets out of harm's way. So an artillery that can actually flee the scene if he's under attack, which is quite nice. In terms of the late game, his range increases, his ammunition increases, his base melee, base missile and explosive damage also increases, so everything that is good increases. His reload time as well. The range becomes really good, 483, it's really nice. So definitely, you can choose to have a couple of Hell Cannons if you want to have that flashback to Warhammer 1, or you can just go with the other artillery units, whatever you choose, whatever you like. And our Regiment of Renown, the Soul of Damnation. Basically, the difference is that he does have more missile strength, he does have more ammunition, so you're never going to run out of ammunition with this guy, and you also have Soul Devourer. A passive ability with one use. If an enemy is present in the ability range, he gets a hefty reload skill bonus. So he'll always be able to fire at least one more shot before being destroyed by an enemy, of course. And he's still unbreakable, so you'll still have some time to save him. Definitely a good addition. If you bring in some Hell Cannons, just make sure that you get this ROR unit in there as well. Now up next we have the Skull Cracker. Basically it won't just crack skulls, it will crack everything. Look at that mess. Now, armor piercing weapon damage, base weapon damage bonuses versus infantry. This is the same. He's also magical attacks. He does have a ton of armor and lots of speed, so he's quite good at being a chariot. That's what you should use him for, of course. Now, in addition, he's also a wall breaker. You can use him to destroy walls in melee. As if it wasn't enough, he still has that nice more power ability, more acceleration, more mass, more speed. Pop this one up and hit any target with it. He'll just do really nicely as a chariot. A nice addition to your armies for sure. In terms of later on, what does he get? Interestingly enough, he actually gets quite a lot of weapon strength, speed, and charge, which is great, but also the melee attack and the melee defense. At least he gets a hefty bonus to melee attack, but still, melee defense, he's still weaker, so make sure that you keep him walking and charging around. Don't keep him in melee for prolonged periods of time, or he may fall. Coming up next, we have the Death Shrieker rocket launcher. Basically, this is more of an anti-large. It's kind of like the bolt thrower. You have two ways of setting it up. Let's use the demolition rocket, which gives him a hefty plus 500 bonuses versus large. So any large target that you hit will definitely suffer from a lot of damage. Now, basically, he'll just become better and better over time. Let me show you the stats. These are, of course, referring to the basic missile strength, but of course, you can tell that the demolition rocket will also increase in terms of missile strength. Now, he gets a lot of missile strength, a lot of range, more ammunition, which is important because he does have low amounts of ammunition compared to other artilleries. So, yeah, he becomes quite the menace for any, and quite the nice addition to a dwarf, Chaos Dwarf army. So, yeah, make use of them, of course, against those large targets, large monsters, single entities, maybe a lord, and if you can manage to hit that, well, he'll do a lot of damage, that's for sure. And finally, we do have the Dreadquake Mortar, a mortar-style artillery unit. You already know of these, but it has a nice addition here. So, of course, it is a mortar that causes armor piercing, which is in itself a good thing. It is also lacking some ammunition. It only has 15, but magical attacks. But it does cause the monster's impact, which means that it will stay there and do a lot of damage because their speed, their charge speed is reduced. So, yeah. One addition here that should be noted is how much the unit changes for the better in the later stages. It gains the range that it's lacking, it gains the ammunition that it is lacking, and it also gains even more missile strength. So definitely one of those units that will just become much better late game if you can upgrade it, of course. So yeah, don't sleep on this one. I know people like the mammoth cannons as well, but the Dreadquake Mortar will certainly do your wonders for your armies as well. And there you go, all the Chaos Dwarf units in their roster, before and after research, XP and redline skills. I do hope that this video helps you understand how you can better use and compile your armies for your campaigns and to have the most out of every single unit. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time.